The devil's greatest triumph was not persuading man to worship him. It was persuading man that he does not exist. And once that deception took root, he no longer needed to wear horns, only smiles. He no longer needed to summon demons, only directors. The battlefield of faith was no longer the cathedral. It became the screen. The modern sermon is no longer preached from pulpits. It is streamed in episodes. Once upon a time, the storyteller was a prophet, warning of the wages of sin. Now, the storyteller is an influencer, assuring us that sin is merely self-expression. Every generation thinks itself too clever for myth, yet every age invents new ones to replace the old. And in this new mythology of entertainment, good and evil have changed costumes. Heaven has become a backdrop, hell a metaphor, and witchcraft a metaphor for empowerment. What was once condemned as rebellion against divine order is now marketed as independence, creativity, and freedom. But freedom without truth is only another name for slavery. It begins innocently, as all temptations do. A show about a misunderstood girl at a gloomy school, a tale about a charming fallen angel, a fantasy about monsters and magic. We say, it's only fiction. Yet, fiction has always been the language through which eternity speaks. Every myth we absorb shapes our moral imagination. Every story we admire becomes a sermon to our soul. You may think you are watching for entertainment, but entertainment is education in disguise. The devil does not need you to summon him. He only needs you to sympathize with him. And so today's world worships not by kneeling, but by binge-watching. The new altar is the glowing screen, the new liturgy the episode that plays just one more time. When I was alive, I once wrote that our world was a great shadowland, where heaven's light reaches only faintly through the fog of appetite and pride. Today that fog has thickened. It is not only that men do not believe in God. They do not believe in good. They have replaced revelation with representation and faith with feeling. The imagination, once meant to lift us toward the divine, is now dragged down to decorate the abyss. It is not that art has become evil. It is that art has forgotten awe. We have replaced worship with wonder, reverence with curiosity, obedience with opinion. And this is why witchcraft has become fashionable again, because it flatters the oldest desire in the human heart to be as gods, to command rather than serve, to shape reality by will rather than by grace. Take, for instance, the curious case of Wednesday. The series pretends to be merely a dark comedy, a modern Gothic fairy tale. Yet beneath its charm lies a sermon far older than Christianity itself, that emotion is weakness, detachment is strength, and individuality is salvation. Wednesday Addams is not portrayed as lost. She is portrayed as liberated from family, from faith, from any moral frame except her own delight. She is the high priestess of cynicism, and the world applauds. But the soul cannot live long on detachment. It was not made to be admired, it was made to love. The lie of the modern age is that coldness is power, but indifference is not strength, it is starvation. A soul that feels nothing soon believes in nothing. The devil does not need to tempt you to hate God. He only needs to convince you that you do not need him. Next comes The Witcher, a world of monsters and mercenaries, where morality is a coin to be flipped rather than a compass to be followed. Its message is seductive. There are no heroes, no villains, only choices. And while this may sound mature, it is the most ancient heresy of all, that good and evil are illusions, mere constructs of perception. Once that seed takes root, the conscience rots quietly. We begin to admire complexity more than clarity, cunning more than compassion. The sword that once defended truth becomes the instrument that cuts truth to pieces. Yet, if there is no true north, every compass is worthless. The Witcher's world mirrors our own, cynical, weary, allergic to virtue. We call that realism. But reality without righteousness is only despair in disguise. Then there is Lucifer, the most charming devil ever televised. He is handsome, witty, misunderstood. He plays the piano, helps the police, falls in love. How harmless, how human he seems. And yet, that is precisely the danger. For this Lucifer does not tempt you to evil. He tempts you to empathy, empathy without repentance, sympathy without surrender. His rebellion is no longer monstrous but relatable. He is no longer the enemy. He is the anti-hero. But you cannot make peace with the father of lies by rebranding him as misunderstood. You can humanize the devil all you want. He will still dehumanize you. The story of Lucifer is the inversion of the gospel, redemption without the Redeemer, salvation through self-acceptance. But self-acceptance without humility is merely pride dressed for television. If you think these stories are harmless, consider this. Repetition is ritual. Every episode rehearses a belief. Every character trains the imagination. You do not need to bow to an idol if you already think like one. Witchcraft, in its purest symbolic sense, is not about spells. It is about sovereignty. It is the belief that one's will is supreme, that reality must bend to desire. That creed is now the spirit of modernity itself. Our generation no longer prays, "Thy will be done." It whispers instead, "My will be done." That is witchcraft in its subtlest form. Not the invocation of demons, but the dethronement of God in the human heart. And then came Game of Thrones, that grand spectacle of kingdoms and betrayal, blood and beauty, fire and ice. It presented itself as realism, a world without clear good or evil, only politics and power. Yet beneath the armor and dragons lies a theology older than paganism itself. That power is truth, and the throne is God. The moral center collapses under spectacle. We are taught to admire cunning more than courage, manipulation more than mercy. We cheer for those who play the game well, not for those who play it rightly. If you want to live, the world whispers, you must abandon honor. Thus the imagination of millions has been baptized in moral grayness. The story becomes not a tragedy of fallen men, but a celebration of falling. When virtue becomes naive and cruelty becomes clever, the soul begins to lose its appetite for light. Evil does not conquer by being stronger. It conquers by being entertaining. But perhaps the most dangerous of them all hides behind the face of innocence. The chilling adventures of Sabrina. Here the witch no longer hides in the forest. She walks in daylight, speaks like a modern girl, dresses like rebellion disguised as empowerment. The series teaches that submission to authority, be it parental, moral, or divine, is oppression. That the only salvation is self-determination. And in this new gospel, the serpent has rewritten Genesis. The forbidden fruit is now the symbol of awakening. Yet no one tells the viewer that every self-made God becomes his own tormentor. Witchcraft is not merely the invocation of darkness, it is the enthronement of the self. The new religion of our age no longer says, "There is no God." It says, "You are God." And thus the world becomes a cathedral of mirrors, everyone praying to their own reflection. The same spirit hums softly beneath the enduring myth of Harry Potter. Yes, it is beautiful. Yes, it captures wonder. But wonder without worship becomes the counterfeit of faith. The spells and symbols are not evil because they summon demons. They are dangerous because they substitute divinity. When miracles become magic, prayer becomes performance. Children learn that power comes from within, not from beyond. They learn to command rather than to commune, and soon their hearts begin to prefer wonder to wisdom. That, my friends, is how enchantment replaces eternity. The soul no longer longs for heaven. It longs for Hogwarts. It no longer seeks holiness. It seeks power cloaked in innocence. The moral imagination, once shaped by parables of humility and grace, is now shaped by stories of control. The line between creation and creator has been blurred until the creature thinks himself sovereign. And then there is Stranger Things, the most brilliant disguise of all. It is nostalgia, innocence, friendship, love but wrapped in darkness. Its monsters crawl not only from other dimensions, but from the recesses of our own fascination with fear. It tells us that facing the darkness is what makes us human, and that is true to a degree. But what it does not tell us is that staring too long into the abyss reshapes the eyes. The mind becomes comfortable with horror. The heart begins to enjoy what it should resist. When the demonic becomes aesthetic, evil ceases to be terrifying, it becomes thrilling. And once the thrill replaces terror, the conscience sleeps. The great seduction of the modern imagination is not that it celebrates sin, but that it sanitizes it. Evil, when polished and packaged, no longer warns, it entertains. You see, each of these shows is not merely a production, it is a parable. It teaches, not through sermons, but through sympathy. You begin to feel for the witch, admire the fallen angel, excuse the tyrant, pity the demon, and in doing so, the moral axis of your heart tilts a little more toward confusion. Once good and evil lose their distance, the soul loses its direction. The danger is not that you will become wicked. It is that you will become weary, weary of discernment, weary of conviction, weary of standing firm. The spirit of witchcraft does not enter through ritual. It enters through indifference. It whispers, "It doesn't matter." And when everything becomes morally relative, the devil has won without a fight. But let me be clear. The purpose of this warning is not to condemn art, nor to demand censorship. It is to awaken discernment. For imagination is holy when it remembers its origin. The power of story is not evil. It is sacred when it reveals truth. The devil does not create anything. He only corrupts what already exists. Witchcraft is the parody of worship. The spell is the parody of prayer. The ritual is the parody of reverence. Every temptation is merely a truth inverted. And so, what we see in these modern shows is not creativity gone wild, but theology gone numb. The soul, forgetting its hunger for God, feeds instead on shadows of transcendence. Once long ago, I wrote that all that is not eternal is eternally out of date. These words have never been truer. The modern world chases relevance and loses reverence. It confuses emotion for spirituality and opinion for revelation. We have built a civilization that feels deeply but believes nothing. And when feeling replaces faith, the door is wide open for every counterfeit miracle. Witchcraft, in its cinematic form, is not about broomsticks or cauldrons. It is about imagination divorced from truth. It is what happens when man worships wonder and forgets wisdom. If you look carefully, you will notice that each of these shows glorifies a single theme: power without responsibility, knowledge without humility, freedom without obedience. These are not just plot lines, they are philosophies. They teach subtly that the human heart is its own law, its own judge, its own savior. But the human heart left to itself is a tyrant. It is capable of great beauty, yes, but without grace, it devours itself. The ancient sin was not murder or theft. It was pride. Ye shall be as gods. That was the first spell ever cast, and it is still being cast today, now with better lighting and higher resolution. We live in a time where darkness sells because it feels authentic. Light feels naive. Goodness feels simplistic. We crave complexity even in corruption, depth even in despair. But truth, like light, is simple because it is pure. It does not need embellishment. It only needs courage to be seen. Every generation must choose whether it will worship the Creator or the creation. And in that choice lies the fate of the imagination itself. When imagination kneels before the divine, it becomes a cathedral. When it kneels before the self, it becomes a mirror maze. Witchcraft is the worship of mirrors. Christianity is the worship of light. The question is not whether these shows are evil. The question is whether your soul has grown too comfortable with darkness. When the conscience stops flinching, when the heart stops discerning, when the mind stops questioning, then the spell is complete. You do not need to curse God to forget him. You only need to be entertained long enough to stop hearing his voice. The greatest danger of evil is not its ugliness, but its charm. We expect darkness to appear as horror, but the devil has learned something new, or rather something ancient, that to conquer the modern soul, he must first entertain it. And so evil no longer arrives with horns and sulfur. It arrives with cinematography and soundtracks. It seduces the senses before it enslaves the soul. We have come to believe that if something feels moving, it must be good. If it stirs emotion, it must be truth. But not every tear is holy. Not every thrill is divine. The serpent, too, can play beautiful music. The tragedy of our age is not that people no longer believe in God, but that they still believe in everything else. The consequence of this spiritual amnesia is subtle, yet catastrophic. When good and evil become mere tropes, the conscience becomes an accessory. The moral imagination, once a sacred compass, is now a screen for projection. The human heart becomes desensitized, unable to tell the difference between sympathy and surrender. We start to pity sin, to romanticize rebellion, to intellectualize disobedience. And soon, the soul forgets how to kneel. We forget that humility was never humiliation. It was health. The modern mind believes that enlightenment comes from rebellion. But rebellion is only glorious when what you rebel against is truly evil. The devil's cleverest lie is convincing you that obedience is slavery. Yet obedience to truth is the only thing that ever set a man free. You see, witchcraft, not the folklore, but the philosophy, is older than time. It is the belief that will alone defines reality. It is pride institutionalized as power. It is the unspoken religion of our age, the worship of the self. It whispers that there are no laws higher than desire, no authority higher than emotion. It promises transcendence but delivers isolation. The practitioner of such spiritual freedom becomes his own God, and therefore his own prisoner. For no one can bear the weight of divinity. The heart collapses under its own worship. The ancient Hebrews once built a golden calf, not because they wanted to betray God, but because they wanted something they could see. They wanted control, not chaos, certainty, not surrender. The modern man builds the same idol, only now it glows in pixels. We too want a faith we can edit, a morality we can customize, a spirituality that flatters rather than confronts. That is the witchcraft of modernity. It turns revelation into reflection, prayer into projection. The new magic circle is the algorithm that shows you only yourself, your own beliefs mirrored endlessly until you mistake the echo for God. C.S. Lewis once wrote, that hell is the place where everyone sits on their own throne, perfectly convinced they are right and perfectly alone. The danger of the age of witchcraft is not mass rebellion, but mass loneliness. We have exalted the self so highly that we have lost the ability to love beyond it. We do not seek communion, we seek validation. We do not seek truth, we seek confirmation. The self that was meant to be offered now demands to be worshipped. And when everyone becomes their own deity, the world becomes a pantheon of noise, all gods, yet none divine. The shows that glorify magic promise empowerment, but empowerment without grace always ends in decay. They teach that power heals, that mastery saves, that control brings peace. But history and scripture both say otherwise. Every empire built on self-worship collapses into dust. Every tower raised to heaven by human pride falls the same way, under its own weight. For man was never designed to bear infinite power. He was designed to receive infinite love. Witchcraft, at its essence, is the refusal of grace. It is the soul saying, I can do it without you. And from that moment, the paradise of possibility turns into the desert of despair. Look around. The culture is full of language once reserved for prayer. Manifest your destiny. Summon your energy. Speak your reality into existence. These phrases echo the spiritual hunger of man, but misdirected. They are confessions of a species that still believes in miracles, but no longer believes in God. We have not stopped being spiritual. We have only changed our object of worship. Witchcraft fills the vacuum where reverence once lived. It sells the illusion that the universe is obedient to our emotions. And yet, a soul that bends the world to its will soon finds itself bent by its own emptiness. The deeper it gazes into the mirror, the less it remembers its maker. The spiritual consequence of this is grave. A generation fluent in energy, yet ignorant of eternity. They know how to align, but not how to adore. They can feel the sacred, but cannot define it. They speak of vibrations, but not of virtue. And without virtue, energy becomes vanity, movement without meaning, passion without purpose. This is why our age is anxious even in abundance. We have mastered the language of light, but forgotten how to see. We speak of love, but cannot bear commitment. We speak of purpose, but cannot endure suffering. We speak of growth, but cannot accept humility. Witchcraft, at its heart, is not rebellion against God. It is rebellion against reality. It promises that you can have joy without sacrifice, power without patience, divinity without discipline. But every shortcut to heaven leads through hell. And yet, I do not speak these words to condemn the viewer, but to awaken him. For the imagination was never meant to be extinguished, only redeemed. God does not destroy art, He sanctifies it. The problem is not that we create worlds, but that we forget who created us. The imagination was given not to rival God, but to reflect Him. Its purpose is not domination, but wonder. When art forgets its altar, it becomes idolatry. But when art remembers its origin, it becomes prayer. The true miracle of creativity is not that we can make, but that we are made. You may think it's just fiction. But fiction is the subconscious liturgy of a civilization. What we imagine, we eventually believe. What we admire, we eventually imitate. And what we normalize, we eventually become. That is why the battle for the human soul will not be fought with weapons, but with stories. The devil knows this better than we do. He has learned to package poison in poetry. But God, too, is a storyteller. And His story ends in resurrection. The question is, whose narrative will you live by? There comes a moment when every soul must stand before its own reflection and ask a question it has long avoided. What have I become while I wasn't watching myself? The screen that once entertained you has turned into a mirror, and the characters that moved across it now move within you. The girl who believed emotion was weakness has taught you to hide your tenderness. The charming devil who broke rules for the sake of freedom has whispered that consequences are illusions. The queen who won her throne through betrayal has persuaded you that goodness is impractical. Slowly, the imagination becomes the conscience, and the conscience, once radiant with clarity, begins to dim. You do not feel corrupted, you feel clever. You do not feel lost, you feel liberated. But that is how every fall begins, not with a scream, but with a shrug. The modern world has been lulled into a gentle sleep by stories that flatter its intellect. We are too evolved, it says, for notions of sin or salvation. And yet the same world lies restless, haunted by anxiety, starved for meaning. We have traded the vocabulary of virtue for the language of validation. We no longer confess. We post. We no longer seek redemption. We seek recognition. Our rituals are digital. Our altars algorithmic. The priest is the influencer. The sermon is the stream. And the congregation applauds itself. We have mistaken noise for knowledge and visibility for vision. That is the deepest spell of all the hypnosis of self-importance. The devil no longer needs to tempt you with wickedness. He only needs to convince you that you are enough without grace. C.S. Lewis once said, "The gates of hell are locked from the inside." How true that remains. The modern soul is not dragged into damnation. It decorates it. We do not curse heaven. We curate our own little hells and call them identities. We no longer rebel violently. We rebel politely, with self-help slogans and pseudo-spiritual affirmations. Follow your truth, we say. But truth cannot be followed if it is constantly being invented. The command to follow your own truth is the same temptation whispered in Eden. You shall be as gods. And still we fall for it. We post about energy and manifestation, and we think we have found enlightenment. Yet, all we have done is rename pride and call it power. The witchcraft of the 21st century is psychological. It does not summon spirits. It shapes them. But listen carefully. The enemy does not mind you believing in spirituality. He only minds you believing in truth. He will let you meditate, manifest, align, vibrate as long as you never repent. Because repentance acknowledges an authority higher than the self. The devil does not fear power. He fears humility. He does not fear passion. He fears purity. Witchcraft, as it has evolved in our culture, is nothing more than the industrialization of pride. It tells every soul, you are light. But light without source is darkness pretending to shine. You were not meant to be your own Sunday. You were meant to reflect one. And yet, even in this fog, the light still calls. There is still that quiet ache that no binge watch can numb, that subtle longing between episodes, that whisper between notifications. There must be more than this. That voice is not the echo of nostalgia. It is the memory of heaven. It is the sound of eternity knocking on the walls of your temporary world. You can drown it with noise. You can bury it beneath pleasure, but you cannot silence it completely. It waits patiently behind every distraction, for the soul knows its true home, even when the mind forgets. Look again at your reflection, not with condemnation, but with honesty. Ask yourself, what have I allowed to shape me? Every story you consume leaves fingerprints on your imagination. Every image you admire becomes an ingredient in your identity. The question is not whether you are influenced, it is by whom. There is no neutral ground. The soul is always being discipled either by heaven or by hell. When you admire cruelty, you learn its rhythm. When you sympathize with pride, you rehearse its posture. When you laugh at sin, you soften your guard. And when you glorify rebellion, you eventually forget that there was ever something worth obeying. But you are not beyond return. You never were. Grace is not a concept, it is a pursuit. It chases even those who mock it. It waits at the end of every illusion, every heartbreak, every disappointment that reveals the futility of self-worship. The moment the soul admits its need, the spell breaks. Darkness loses its glamour, and humility becomes holy again. God is not threatened by your doubts, only by your indifference. He will walk through your screens, through your stories, through your cynicism, until the heart remembers its design to love something greater than itself. The danger of witchcraft is not that it introduces demons, but that it erases discernment. It replaces awe with irony, reverence with rebellion, faith with fascination. But fascination fades, and when it does, the human heart must choose despair or surrender. The mirror offers you only yourself. Heaven offers you everything beyond yourself. Choose wisely which reflection you will bow to, for whatever you worship, you become. And perhaps that is the final truth the modern age must face. You cannot watch shadows forever without becoming one. But you can turn. You can still turn toward the light that has never stopped shining. The same light that turned Saul into Paul, that turned fear into faith, that turned despair into song. It still burns behind the veil of your distraction. It waits for the soul that dares to look up instead of inward. For witchcraft begins with the worship of the self, but salvation begins with the surrender of it. There is a silence that follows every storm, the kind that makes you realize the noise wasn't out there, it was within you. You begin to sense it after the credits roll, when the final episode ends, and you are left staring at your own reflection in the black glass of the screen. That silence is holy. It is the moment when your soul remembers that entertainment cannot feed it, that thrill cannot save it, that self-worship cannot heal it. You have tasted power, imagination, and rebellion, and yet something inside still aches for peace. That ache is not weakness. It is the echo of Eden. It is the homesickness of the soul, the quiet proof that you were made for more than what flickers in front of you. Do not despise that ache. It is your compass back to truth, for God often hides his call inside discomfort. The unease you feel when you sense that the world's light is counterfeit, that is the first flicker of real illumination. Every generation must rediscover what holiness means, not by rejecting the world, but by seeing through it. The enemy does not fear your sin as much as he fears your clarity. He can twist your pleasure, your pride, your dreams, but he trembles when you begin to see. For when the eyes open, the spell breaks. And when the spell breaks, the soul awakens to the staggering simplicity of grace, that you were never meant to conjure your own divinity. You were meant to receive it. Grace is not magic. Magic manipulates. Grace transforms. Magic bends the world to your will. Grace bends your will toward the good. Magic begins with, I want. Grace begins with, thy will be done. That is why witchcraft, for all its allure, ends in exhaustion. It promises control and delivers chaos. It promises transcendence and delivers emptiness. The soul cannot be satisfied by the worship of itself. No mirror, however polished, can show you the light that shines behind it. Only surrender can. The world will call that surrender weakness. It will tell you to manifest, to visualize, to claim the universe as your servant. It will feed your ego until it bursts, and then sell you therapy for the pieces. But heaven calls surrender wisdom. The proud build towers to reach God. The humble find him already waiting at the ground floor. You need not ascend. You need only awaken. For God is not hiding behind the stars. He is standing quietly at the door of your conscience, knocking with every truth you try to ignore. There is a war being fought, not on battlefields, but in imaginations. Every story, every frame, every song is part of that invisible conflict, the contest for your perception of good and evil. The devil's tactic is not domination, but distortion. He cannot create. He can only counterfeit. He takes the language of wonder and divorces it from worship, takes the hunger for meaning and feeds it illusions. But the antidote to illusion is not withdrawal. It is discernment. To watch with eyes awake, to read with a mind that remembers eternity, to see beauty and trace it back to its source rather than stopping at the surface. That is how art becomes sacred again. We are not called to fear the world, but to see it truthfully. The Christian is not a hater of stories. He is a lover of truth. And when truth becomes rare, even fiction must be judged by the light it hides or reveals. Ask of every tale you consume, does this make me love the good more, or does it make me numb to it? Does this teach me reverence, or does it teach me pride? Does it awaken the soul, or sedate it? For whatever dulls your hunger for heaven is not harmless. It is a quiet poison disguised as pleasure. But even now, the world can still be redeemed. Imagination can be redeemed. The screen that once reflected your distraction can become a window for revelation. It depends not on what is shown, but on how you see. A man with light in his heart can walk through shadows without losing his way. A mind anchored in truth can watch the storm and remain unshaken. You were not made to live in fear of darkness. You were made to carry light into it. The final trick of the age is to convince you that faith is naive, that belief in goodness is outdated, that purity is weakness, that humility is an antique virtue. But it is only through those antique virtues that the modern soul survives its own sophistication. The proud may build empires, but only the humble can build eternity. You cannot outthink evil. You can only outlove it. You cannot outplay darkness. You can only outshine it. And so, as the night deepens, remember this: no culture is beyond redemption, and no heart is too deep in the fog to find the morning. The light that once spoke over chaos still speaks over the chaos of your age. It whispers through art, through silence, through the smallest act of courage. It calls to you not to escape the world, but to see it rightly, to discern between the beauty that saves and the beauty that deceives. For one leads upward and the other inward, until the soul drowns in itself. If you wish to break the spell, start here. Close the screen and listen. Not to me, not to the noise, but to that quiet pulse beneath all thought, the ancient heartbeat of truth. It is still there, unchanged by trends, untouched by algorithms, uncorrupted by cynicism. It speaks in the same voice that spoke to Abraham, to Augustine, to Lewis himself. Be still and know that I am God. You have been taught to chase meaning. Now learn to receive it. You have been told to invent yourself. Now learn to remember who made you. You have been told to manifest your reality. Now learn to bow before reality itself. For there is freedom not in the spell, but in the surrender. And there is glory, not in the power of the will, but in the grace that saves. The shows of this age will fade. The idols will rust. The trends will pass like shadows. But the light remains. It is patient. It is personal. It is real. It calls to every watcher, every skeptic, every soul lost in the labyrinth of its own reflection. It says, you do not need to become a god to be loved by one. And when at last you hear that voice, perhaps in a quiet moment, between breaths you will understand what all art, all truth, all longing was trying to tell you from the beginning, that the greatest miracle is not to control the world, but to be transformed by the one who made it. And that, my friends, is how the spell ends, not with fear, but with faith, not with rebellion, but with return, not with magic, but with mercy. The light still calls, and it always will. And now, when the storm of words has settled, when the weight of meaning begins to rest upon your heart, I ask you to do nothing heroic, only to be still. Let the silence hold you the way dawn holds the horizon before the first light breaks. For it is in that quiet that truth does its deepest work. You will not meet God in noise or argument, but in the hush that follows understanding. The world screams for your attention. Heaven waits for your surrender. Do you feel it now, that faint trembling under the surface of your certainty? That is the soul remembering its first love. You have wandered through illusions of power, through the glittering cathedrals of self-worship, through the stories that promised freedom, but delivered only fatigue. And still, beneath it all, something tender remains. It is the ember the darkness could not smother, the spark that belongs to eternity. You may call it conscience, or longing, or ache, but it is the voice of the light itself, reminding you that you were never alone in the labyrinth. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture every scene you have ever admired, every hero, every struggle, every redemption. Notice how each story, even the ones wrapped in shadow, still hungers for the same ending, that good might prevail, that love might outlast death, that light might pierce the night. Why do we crave such endings? Because, deep down, we remember one. The gospel is not a foreign myth. It is the original memory of the human spirit, echoing in every tale we tell. Even in the stories that deny it, it whispers. Even in the shows that mock it, it waits. The heart cannot escape its design. It was made to worship. If it does not worship the Creator, it will worship creation. If it does not bow to truth, it will bow to trend. But worship is not slavery. It is alignment. The planets circle the sun not because they are chained, but because they are free within its gravity. So too, the soul finds liberty only when it moves within the orbit of love. Outside of that orbit, it drifts brilliant for a moment, then cold, then lost. This is the age of lost orbit. Men have learned to reach the stars, but forgotten how to touch heaven. They build machines that speak, but have forgotten how to pray. They conjure worlds out of pixels, but cannot resurrect faith. Yet I tell you this, the night cannot last. There is a dawn that no screen can simulate, a glory that no lens can capture. When it breaks, every false light will fade. Every counterfeit flame will bow to the original fire. Until that hour, walk awake. Watch with open eyes. See art, but discern its soul. Listen to beauty, but question its allegiance. Let nothing steal from you the wonder that bows before holiness. The devil may dress his lies in poetry, but truth has a music that cannot be mimicked, the sound of grace forgiving even those who forget. And when you step back into the noise of the world, the traffic, the laughter, the endless scroll, remember that every soul you pass is also under a spell. Some are asleep, some are waking, some are still searching for the door. Be the quiet light in their darkness. You need not preach. Just burn gently, consistently, without pride. For a single candle held high can still expose 1,000 shadows. When the final story of the world is told, it will not be titled The Triumph of Man or The Fall of Faith. It will be called The Return of the Light. And in that final chapter, the author himself will step onto the stage he wrote, and every question will find its answer, every tear its meaning. Then we will see that even the darkest tales, even the ones that flirted with witchcraft, pride, and despair, were permitted for one reason only, that we might learn to choose the light not by command, but by love. Until then, keep watch. Guard the imagination. It is the gate of the soul. Fill it not with spells, but with songs. Let your mind be the altar where truth is remembered, and your life the proof that holiness can still walk unashamed among men. For though the world may stream its sermons of shadow, there remains one broadcast stronger than all the voice that whispers through conscience and beauty alike. Come home. And so the sermon ends, not in applause, but in awareness. The screen fades, the room quiets, and the listener you remain. The light still calls. It always will.